Thank you to our sponsor, Creative Cities Convention. This year's virtual convention features on-demand video and podcast content that's all available to view at your leisure from now until the 31st of May. Featuring some of the biggest names in the industry debating some of the hottest topics in production, broadcasting and digital content creation across the UK, there are around 30 sessions filled with interesting insights. To buy a ticket or to see a full list of the talks and speakers, please visit www.creativecitiesconvention.com. Hello and welcome to the Broadcast Newswrap, your weekly shorthand guide to the latest news and views from across Teleland. This week we're joined by Mark Cole from sports production firm Whisper and the team at Broadcast Sport to look into the spectacular own goal that the proposed European Super League very quickly became. On Sunday, 12 powerful clubs teamed together with billion-dollar backing from JP Morgan Chase Bank to announce a new tournament that would shake the foundations of football from the grassroots up. The only problem? Nobody wanted it. Fans and professionals joined football bodies in unanimous condemnation, and before you could say breakaway league, the idea was dead. We'll be addressing how TV companies responded to the plan and assess what the impacts and learnings of the past few days are for the sector. And don't worry, there are no plans to set up a rival podcast with a new set of players and formats. No sir, we'll be closing the show as usual with the ever popular segment, What We've Been Watching. I'm Broadcast Insight Editor Jesse Whittock, and this is the Broadcast Newswrap. So we're discussing the story that never really happened, but could have shaken up sports television to its core. I'm delighted to be joined by the gentlemen from Broadcast Sport, Jake Bickerton and Max Miller. Welcome, gentlemen. They've been tracking developments and reactions from the broadcasters and the rights holders, and we'll be able to explain where we are on that front. And we're also joined by Whisper Group Managing Director Mark Cole, who can give us the indie perspective on the week's events. So, Mark, thank you very much for joining us.
Nice to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Max, let's start with you. So there's a lot to unpack here, but can you take us through broadly what the Broadcast Sport approach was to making sense of the ESL situation?
Yeah, of course. So it all started obviously on Sunday night when the 12 clubs, Man United, Arsenal, Tottenham, Chelsea, Man City, Liverpool, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Atletico Madrid, Inter Milan and AC Milan and Juventus announced the plan in the press release and the website that came up saying that there'd be the 15 founding clubs who make the Super League with no relegation, and effectively 5 more teams each year could come and join them. And it immediately had quite a big reaction everywhere, which I'm sure everyone saw over the last few days. And so we thought, kind of coming in on Monday, none of the broadcasters had really made much of a comment. The only people who had at that point were DAZN, who immediately had been linked with being the broadcaster for the competition by some Italian media. But they quickly just brought out a quick statement saying that none of that was true. Neither themselves or their owner, Mr. Blavatnik is what they called him, he's kind of Russian billionaire, weren't in the discussions and they weren't interested at that time, at least. And then shortly afterwards, probably the strongest statement came out from many of the broadcasters against it, which was BT Sport on that morning, who came out and said they were explicitly kind of against the plan. They agreed with what fans were saying and they thought it would have a damaging effect on the long-term health of football, is what their actual words were, which they may have been forced to say, to be honest, as they were the Champions League broadcaster and probably had the most to lose from it all. And other ones, such as like Sky Sports, Amazon, so on, maybe weren't as in that kind of same position. So then you get later on that afternoon, most other places weren't really saying too much. Obviously, as the broadcasters, they're trying to keep their options open in case they had a chance of broadcasting it, I would think. The next day on Tuesday, though, eventually with the pressure building, Sky Sports came out and distanced themselves, again, keeping their options a bit more open than BT did, but they were more like DAZN in the sense that they wanted to make it clear, but they weren't involved in any of the discussions, basically. It wasn't like how they were involved back in the day with the Premier League starting. They wanted to make it clear that there was nothing to do with them. And then finally, on kind of Tuesday late afternoon, Amazon also joined, saying they weren't involved, also kind of keeping their options open, especially as they would likely be the broadcaster with the most to gain, possibly, as they have like an international platform. And the whole point of the Super League is that you're aiming to get more from global fans. So a lot of people have been pointing to them possibly being a winner out of it. But in the end, they felt they had to distance themselves.
Jake, it was from a sort of PR perspective, it was quite a fine line for all of these broadcasters to walk, I guess, it seemed like quite a tightrope. Obviously, BT having sort of vested interest in the Champions League, they were able to be more explicit on their position. But from a broadcasting group's perspective, whilst there was clearly no support for the initiative from fans and clearly from people within the game.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting because they're in, I guess, quite a difficult position in terms of coming out with comments quite early, especially comments that were very strongly against the Super League proposition. And so we were aware that, you know, when we first contacted them, we were probably going to get a lot of no comments coming back again. And that's largely what happened. As Max said, DAZN came out quite early on just to distance themselves a bit. But it took a little while for us to get one of the, you know, the broadcasters, the pay TV broadcasters in the UK to come back and say something like really that wasn't really sitting on the fence in any way. And BT Sport, to be fair, did come back with a very, very strong statement to Max to indicate, you know, unreservedly that they weren't interested. As you say, they are the Champions League broadcasters, so you'd kind of semi-expect that. But that did then allow other broadcasters to come out, you know, slowly over the next day and actually say something rather than just saying no comment. And it was obvious by that point as well that fans, you know, like 85% or whatever of you know, fans were against it. That generally you know, certainly in the UK at least, you know, it was a widespread condemnation of the idea. So I think they felt at that point that it's probably not going to happen anyway. We may as well say something that you know, that at least aligns ourselves with the kind of people that are paying money to us at the moment for our football content. So yeah, I mean, there's obviously some politics involved and things, but it was interesting actually when BT Sport did come out with their statement. Part of it said football makes a significant positive contribution to people's lives at every level, and this needs to be protected. And when we put the story out on Twitter, we had tons of comments underneath, you know, referring back to the pay-per-view that they were doing in lockdown number one, £15 per match, and you know how there was a certain level of hypocrisy involved in the statement they brought out about the Super League versus, you know, their willingness to take, you know, money as Sky Sports also did around that first lockdown period. So, you know, it's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, whatever statement was going to come out. So yeah, in the end, we did get BT Sport, Sky Sports and Amazon all coming out, as well as DAZN at the start, saying that, you know, certainly, you know, distancing themselves from any sort of involvement in the competition. Wasn't to say that I'm sure if it had have happened, they couldn't have then reversed that statement a little bit. But yes, which actually I would have said would only really leave Discovery Plus. I was thinking that, you know, they're moving Eurosport content over to Discovery Plus, and they are looking for, you know, to gain more acquisitions and rights deals. And so I was thinking perhaps it would have been one for them, the big global OTT platform they're rolling out at the moment. So perhaps there's still some options around that for any future sort of Super League type of equivalent that might come about.
Let's look at it from the indie perspective. Mark, if we boil down what the ESL potentially offered to production companies, chances are it would have been a company on the continent that would have probably got the actual physical production rights to the ESL, purely because it seemed to be that players on the continent were the sort of the big kind of movers towards this. But for a company like Whisper that has has fingers in pies ranging from live sport events to more traditional documentary production, something this big feels like it would have offered various companies opportunities. What were you looking at when you first saw this come out? And let's work on the proviso that this was going to go ahead for a certain period of time. Were you internally, what were the sort of discussions that you were having with your colleagues about what this might mean for the sports production in general?
Well, I mean, I think the instant reaction was fascination, really, because, I mean, ultimately it's a football story, but at the heart of it is TV. The motivation around the whole story is TV and money from fans watching TV. So it's intrinsically linked to everything that we do at Whisper in terms of we make lots of football content. And obviously, yeah, we see ourselves as one of the leading production companies in the world. So, yeah, there was definitely that fascination. In a similar manner to BT Sport, UEFA are an existing client of ours, and we've got a partnership with them over the last 3 years, which is continuing to grow. So we were quite measured in our response and aware of that side of it. But I mean, I look at this and I wonder whether that was, I mean, there's been several miscalculations from the organizer of this, as we've seen it blown up in the last 48 hours. But I wonder, by not putting TV at the heart of it, whether that was a big mistake, which has led to the downfall. If you look at, Max mentioned the Premier League in 92, 93, the reason that took off was because Sky were at the heart of it. Sky were involved in those conversations. Sky were curating it and shaping it. It feels like there have been so many afterthoughts in this, and ultimately the reaction of the fans is being the biggest driving force. And TV would have been thinking about that, because TV, in our job, we are always thinking about how do we appeal to viewers? How do we make it? How do we go over some of those barriers that we're potentially going to confront? And that reaction would be one of those things. So by integrating a TV production company or a TV broadcaster or platform as part of that, would have, look, I'm not sure it would be the game changer, but it definitely would have looked at some of those hurdles and perhaps not got to this stage. And now you look at where we are, and it's, in terms of the power, it felt like the big six in the Premier League had some of the power in to take this, or they were using this to leverage those conversations with UEFA. But now UEFA look very firmly strong, in a strong position, because it feels like they've almost played their cards and done that gamble. But look, absolutely, from a production point of view, we always want to get involved in those big picture stories. Every time a World Cup or a European Championships or Olympics or Paralympics come up, we want to be involved in those. And we're fortunate that we have been involved in big events like Rugby World Cup and Paralympics, and hopefully looking ahead to World Cup 2022 and women's competitions as well. So yeah, but I think the key is working really closely and sort of hand in glove with those federations, because TV is such an important part of it, that some of those answers to some of those key questions that are being posed.
I think you make a really good point on the product itself. If you go back to the Premier League, as both Mark and Max have mentioned, really the success of it was the fact that the product was there before they started, wasn't it? They knew exactly what the tournament was going to look like, and how those games would be played, and were clear on how much content they could provide and how many games they could provide to subscribers. It definitely didn't feel like they were sort of at that stage of understanding their own product when they made this announcement. And obviously that probably relates to the fact that that UEFA were about to make a statement around the expanded Champions League, and it definitely felt a little bit like they were trying to get out ahead of that. Unfortunately, the difference being the Champions League is clearly the new proposition for an expanded 36 team tournament, clearly been worked on for a long time, and I think they'll know exactly what they're doing in terms of the broadcasting, and perhaps the folk behind the ESL proposition hadn't quite got to that stage. I do wonder. Jake, you mentioned that this isn't something that's going away. This is certainly, just because this proposal has been rejected, it doesn't mean to say that these powerful football clubs are going to look to just kind of fall back in line. They're definitely looking for more kind of revenue from broadcast rights and whatnot.
I think we have to just to some degree sort of see what happens next, and once it's officially sort of over, we can then look to I guess the future and see what possibilities there might be for clubs to, I suppose, gain more control over their own destiny again, moving away a little bit from the governance of FIFA and UEFA. This breakaway may not have worked out, but there's bound to be other attempts to do a similar thing. Now the cat's out of the bag to some degree, because while this has been talked about for a little while, nothing's really happened until Sunday, where suddenly, out of the blue comes this thing that sounded initially like it was quite well planned out, but there's obviously massive holes in it, and not least what Max and Mark pointed out, there's no broadcaster involved. There didn't seem to be a kind of a fixture list quite the same, and the whole sort of competition didn't have any particular jeopardy attached to it either. So it seemed to be pretty, poorly thought through from a sort of fan's perspective as well. But, broadcasters are clearly going to be looking at this thinking, something's going to happen again. Quite what the timescale might be, we don't know yet. But once that does happen, and perhaps is a bit more of a kind of grown up, well thought out proposition that fans can get behind a little bit more as well, then what does that mean for the future of the Premier League and the Champions League? And, where does that leave, football broadcasts in the future and the rights deals? And so there are some obviously massive implications as soon as something comes about that is a little bit more sort of longer term that people can back and isn't just going to crumble within a few days. So we'll probably look to get some comment pieces around now from broadcasters and production outfits like Whisper to just look ahead at the possibilities and what the implications might be, and how we'll try and deal with those challenges as an industry.
I suppose from Whisper's point of view, there are things like the delayed European Championships coming up, and the World Cup in 2022, and the various other tournaments you mentioned earlier. I guess from a production point of view, you just have to sort of sit tight and keep your eye firmly on the market and try and be ahead of whatever may be announced in future. But how do you sort of play it?
Yeah, I think it's just about building relationships with all those key stakeholders. And I think that, sort of going back to your previous point as well, I think the biggest sort of game changer in the next sort of 5-10 years could be something that they were trying here as a potential strategy, was around direct to consumer content. And I think Jake mentioned around the pay-per-view that was trialed recently, and that feels like the next sort of transition, that we might not get the European Super League, but in the next round of whether it's Premier League or UEFA TV rights, someone might take a bit of a punt on doing that. And I know UEFA have been very successful with launching their own sort of OTT platform. We've worked sort of really closely with the FA to launch the FA Player, and that's a sort of property that initially is in women's football, but gives the FA an infrastructure so that they can be ahead of the game in that model. So that to me might be the next step, is that people sort of dip their toe into that, and similar with the Premier League rights, way that there was like Amazon just sort of came in and took that last package. That is there an opportunity, and look, and could that be the way that they appease some of those big clubs, that a percentage of the income is given on some of those direct to consumer models, because there's a clear indicator there of what works. But look, for us as a production company, I think there's two things. It's building those relationships with the FA, with UEFA, within rugby and within football and within Olympic and Paralympic sport that we're continuing to do. And then again, I think with all our job, it's proof of concept to keep making great content, to keep making great programs, to be nominated for awards and winning awards that we've been fortunate enough to do over the last 2-3 years. And also like innovating with your production as well, like being on top of it with remote production, because that's what these big organizations, federations want. They want an infrastructure and efficiency and sustainability as a key part of those models, so that when you are delivering these big moments, there's some resources that you save, and you're also helping with some of their wider strategic goals as well. So yeah, as with everything in any industry, it's about being ahead of the game and making sure you're the best choice when all these opportunities do come up. So that's the key, I'd say, from our perspective.
Max, I want to bring you back in at this stage. Everything that Mark's talking about there points to an increasingly fragmented sort of sports broadcast market. From the reporting that you guys are doing at the moment, how do you feel that particularly on the football side of things, how is that shaping up?
Yeah, so I think what Mark was saying about the kind of direct to consumer angle is definitely something that could come up a lot more in the future. You've seen quite recently Serie A have signed a new deal with DAZN, which was less money than the deal before. And it's expected in the UK, the next Premier League deal will probably be for less money than the last one, with Sky and BT kind of agreeing to not bid each other up so much. There seems to be lessening revenues for organisations on the broadcast front in that sense from the main broadcasters. And so something along the lines of direct to consumer, there's been talk of, well, they tried to do it earlier this season in the Premier League and it didn't go off very well. It was a bit too expensive probably. But something along those lines might be the future if they think they could actually bring in a bit more money than they can from the main broadcasters as it is.
It's a fascinating debate, isn't it? And I feel like there's probably tons more we could talk about here, but I think we'll probably leave it there. I mean, it's fair to say that the last few days, we're recording this on a Wednesday morning, so less than sort of 72 hours or certainly 96 hours after the initial announcement, that this has been a real roller coaster ride for anyone involved in or interested in sports fandom or broadcasting and production, and it'll be a really interesting one to see how it plays out as we go forward. And for those of you who want to follow that, you can do that by logging into Broadcast Sport, which are Broadcast's sister website. Jake and Max are constantly populating the site with great, interesting, exclusive content. So check that out. But before I let you guys go today, I am going to ask you the question that everyone really wants to know and is here for, which is what you've all been watching. I'm going to start with you, Mark. What's been on the box for you this week?
Well, obviously, like the World Line of Duty, but I'm sure that's a well-trodden path on this program and others. So, I've been very much enjoying that. But yeah, the one I've sort of been binging this week has been The Flight Attendant. I've sort of seen a lot of trials, watching a lot of sport on Sky, and it's been very heavily trialed. And then watched it over the last sort of 10 days, 2 weeks. A bit of a roller coaster, a bit up and down in terms of episodes where I think it is quite slow and I'm about to give it up, and then they just throw an unbelievable ending in there, and you're sort of hooked, and then suddenly the next episode's on. But no, I think it's some of the acting is great. Love the titles. Love some of the engaging storylines, and actually a couple of twists that I wasn't expecting. And overall, really enjoyed it. It's been a bit, chatting to people in the office, a bit hit and miss. Some haven't stuck with it in the way I have, but I think it's worth it. I definitely recommend, and really enjoyed it.
It really reminded me of Billy Piper's I Hate Susie. It's that same kind of format, but with a really fun murder mystery thrown in at the middle. It's good fun. I'm on the side of those that enjoy it. We went through it very quickly. Jake, what about yourself? What have you been watching?
Most of what I watch tends to be what my kids are watching, to be honest. And they've really got into Superstore, the Netflix, NBC sort of sitcom mockumentary set in a superstore, as the name might suggest. Very strong characters, and it's entertaining. It's really well written. There's lots going on. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous at times, but that's part of its attraction as well. But yeah, if you've not tried it yet, I think if you like things like Parks and Recreation, those kind of slightly quirky, oddball mockumentary type vibe about it, then I think you'll really like Superstore. And then just a quick one, Big Bang Theory, which I know for some reason you don't like very much, but and my kids have really have massively got into that. So we've seen that probably every episode at least 4 times at the moment. They're still rerunning it in our house as we speak.
Embarrassingly, Jake, I also had Superstore as what we've been watching about a month ago, and that was I don't have any kids in my house.
I don't think you necessarily need them for Superstore. I mean, you're getting one. You're getting one, Jesse. So is the reason you're having a kid so you can feel less guilty about watching Superstore?
That's exactly it. on the nose. Max, what's been on the box for you?
For me, it's been Shrill, which is on iPlayer. I think I've watched a few episodes this week. Slightly like Superstore in a sense. It's kind of quirky, half-hour comedy show. It's quite offbeat and seems to find quite a lot of humour in kind of daily occurrences for a woman in these times, I guess, which is quite funny for me, I guess.
I've started this morning the Robert Kirkman adult animation sort of superhero comedy action series Invincible, which I didn't have very high expectations for, but is pleasantly pleasing. There's a very good twist at the end of the first episode, and the scripting isn't quite as stilted as some adult sort of animation, particularly in the action space, can be. So I'd recommend that one. It looks good. There are some kind of you can see the Robert Kirkman influences. Nobody's safe. Anyone could be killed off at any point in time. I hope that the quality of that keeps up, but so far so good. And on that note, I think we have hit our shut-off point. So Jake, Max and Mark, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next week for the next Broadcast News Wrap.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks for your time. Cheers, Jesse.
Thanks for listening to the Broadcast News Wrap with me, Jesse Whittock, Whisper Managing Director Mark Cole, and Broadcast Sports Jake Bickerton and Max Miller. This episode was edited by Max Goldbart, and you can listen to all 42 previous editions of the pod on Spotify or iTunes, or via the website www.broadcastnow.co.uk. Thank you to our sponsor, Creative Cities Convention. This year's virtual convention features on-demand video and podcast content that's all available to view at your leisure from now until the 31st of May. Featuring some of the biggest names in the industry debating some of the hottest topics in production, broadcasting and digital content creation across the UK, there are around 30 sessions filled with interesting insights. To buy a ticket or to see a full list of the talks and speakers, please visit www.creativecitiesconvention.com.